Good evening. Welcome to the webinars. This particular webinar, while it's one specific assignment, I think it gives me a platform to make some commentary on some really important aspects of the parent-child relationship and of communication and our communication model in general. It's an assignment that is often used in conjunction with a field visit. So your therapist at Evoke may ask you to review this assignment or complete this assignment before you come out there. Then it becomes, like I said, this jumping off point, this platform where you can begin to talk about the relationship between you and your child. Like I've said many times, and I'm going to say this as clearly as I can to begin, I don't know of anything more important, more valuable than for a child to learn to, in a healthy way, confront their past, confront their parents, confront the system. Really, that's really what the symptoms are, aren't they? They're this expression of hurt, of pain, of frustration, spilling out sideways, coming out inappropriately or maladaptively. So, if we can equip children, and subsequently, if we can equip parents with a practice, with a skill set, so they can listen and provide a safe place for the communication of these feelings, we stand the opportunity. We have the opportunity then to replace symptoms with healthy communication. So while it might be uncomfortable, while your first instinct might be to receive these kinds of things as blame or criticism, it still can be an incredibly helpful resource for you. And as you develop it, you'll come to, I think, understand and see them differently. So what we're trying to do is create a dialogue, create a different kind of discussion. If we can learn to tell our stories, and if we can be present enough to listen to others tell their stories, then we can arrive at the solution. The solution is feeling it and talking about it. That is why communication skills are so central to the parent's curriculum, because they provide the family with a healthy outlet for difficult and painful emotions. And if we are to create a space for our children to express themselves, we must first figure out what prevents us from seeing through the symptoms to the unexpressed emotions underneath. The next step is to equip ourselves with skills that support that process. So that's the backdrop. That's from Journey of the Heroic Parent, and that's the backdrop for tonight's particular skill set. We're trying to create a dialogue, and we're going to talk about, in general, the communication model. And like I talk about a lot of times, it can help us along. Really, it is the operationalization, the activity of intimacy, right? If we believe in and live by the communication skills that we teach, then we're really creating a place where I get to be me, I get to know my truth and express it to you, and you get to hear it, and then vice versa. I get to hear your truth, and I don't necessarily take it as a request or a confrontation or critique of mine. So it allows for the presence of each other. It allows for the discovery and the expression of truth. There's a lot of ways that children aren't equal to parents, and that is they have decisions to make, right? There is a hierarchy in family. It is a parent's responsibility and job to make decisions for children, especially those that are under 18. But there is always an equality in communication, right? There's always some core to communication that is equal, which means that I have a right to my feelings, you have a right to your feelings. And we have a right to not have our feelings dismissed, right? We have a right to not have our feelings judged, right? And argued with. We don't need to justify them. So there is that kind of emotional equality. And in part, I'm going to say some far-reaching things this evening, because if we can understand mental health in this way, that the goal is to be able to feel, first of all, to know and feel, and then secondly, to connect to other people, and to avoid manipulation. If we can understand it that simply, then we can understand how effective communication skills in general can be, and specifically with regard to the 4 R's assignments. So let's get into the 4 R's and talk about aspects of each of them. This is an assignment where you list your 4 different R words, and you list them. The first one is regret. These are things that I regret. For example, choices or behaviors that I have made, yelling in the family, and so forth, right? So these are things that I am accountable for and have some regret or remorse over. And in each of these skills, we're going to talk about an aspect that is about you and as it relates to them. This is not necessarily an apology. In fact, I think at times an apology asks for something else. An apology asks for forgiveness. And that's why I often place so little emphasis when my clients are working on their accountability to apologize. Because I think it takes more courage, more strength to say, here's what I did wrong, here's what I know I did. Right? I'm accountable for that, I'm responsible for that. And I'm not necessarily asking for your forgiveness. There's something manipulative, something that's less than accountable when I'm asking you to change how you feel about it. It starts to be about me and taking care of me. It's possible to both regret and learn from your mistakes. When our regret, when our guilt prevents us from learning, from looking at it, from seeing ourselves clearly, that's when it becomes non-useful to us. So it's important that we don't allow our sense of remorse to rob us of the value of the lesson that comes from it. Right? There's sometimes it's difficult to learn things any other way than by making mistakes, and a lot of us can relate to that. And of course, a lot of us can relate to that in and through our children because we see them have that experience. Having a regret includes having empathy and recognition for those that you hurt, the pain that you contributed to them. I can see how I hurt you. Right? I am with you in the sadness that I've created. It's not wallowing, right? It's not staying stuck. I tell the story of one time when I was apologizing to my wife and I was looking down in shame and she pulled my chin up and said, look at me. I don't want to have to take care of you right now. I want to be mad at you. I want to be hurt right now. And if I have to take care of you and you're wallowing, then this is really about you, a selfish exercise. So it takes courage and strength to look at somebody in the eyes and to be with them in that pain and to really confront our own shame in that process, because our shame, it compels us to hide. It asks us to hide ourselves. It doesn't have a lot of promises, right? This is not saying I'm going to do better. Again, I think like an apology, too much of a promise when we're expressing our regret or our accountability, too much of that asks the other person to feel differently. So just sitting with and owning what you did and talking about it and voicing it is the purest expression of regret. With regard to the other, we let them feel their hurt, their anger, right? We don't, when somebody is expressing their regret, we don't try to console them or make it better. We sit with the discomfort that they're sitting with. We don't try to lecture or teach. I don't know how many of you can relate to this. I can in my own marriage, in fact. When one of us, my wife or I, apologizes to the other, we will laugh sometimes because the person who's being apologized to will follow it up with a lecture. And that doesn't feel very good, right? My wife will say sorry to me or vice versa. I'll say sorry to her. And then the other person will respond with, yeah, you bet you did that. You do that all the time. It's like, wait a second. I'm vulnerably expressing my regret, and the response that I'm getting is more of a lecture. We learn to value, I talk about this all the time, of learning to value the relapse, the regression, the mistake, learning to get something out of it. And if it's just shrouded in shame and guilt, we're not going to learn from it. It's just going to be a bad thing that we want out and away from us. We understand that our perspective will evolve over time, right? I think we assume that the first expression of regret, the first expression of accountability or awareness is some kind of static thing that sticks with us. And what we learn about ourselves over time is that we tell the same story very differently as we learn, as we evolve. So allow yourself and your child to evolve, to change meaning as you go forward. When in doubt, when somebody's expressing their regret, even though it might be immature in those early phases I just suggested, the best option oftentimes is just to close your mouth. Just listen. When in doubt, don't talk. Just provide a safe place for them, right? You're gently trying to invite them out of that. And if they have to get it perfect or right or be all insightful on the first go, it's going to be a very unsafe process for them. The second R is resent. This is some kind of anger that you feel toward the other. Things I resent that you haven't done or have done. Not doing your homework, ignoring the rules, drug use, etc. So with regard to these, this is a trap that parents often fall into. You don't owe the other person anything. You don't owe them forgiveness or trust or gratitude for being honest with you, right? We're afraid that we do, and we're afraid that if we don't give them those things, that they're going to feel deflated by the process. But that's just a measure of their level of strength and accountability in the process. So you don't owe them. You get to feel what you feel. It's okay for you to have feelings and to have a self and to make a slow adjustment to this new awareness, this new thing that they're sharing with you. Right? So You get to feel resentful if your child tells you something that they've never told you before. You get to feel resentful if while they're away you find out some fact that they had been hiding or lying about. You get to have that. And it's your prerogative to naturally go through the process of forgiveness. And I think a lot of parents feel guilty about that, want to unburden the child with that. And it's important for you to have a self. It's important for you to own it, right? It's yours, but not to displace it to take care of anybody else in the process. So it's okay for you to have your feelings. It actually helps others with empathy, right? When you get to feel, when you express your feelings, when you're honest and authentic, not cruel, not abusive, other people start to have a sense of, our children can have a sense of how we are affected by that, right? As they develop and as they grow. So us being more authentic contributes to our child's capacity to develop empathy. So that can be important. Like I said, the balance between guilting and pressuring them and punishing them emotionally for it and not feeling it all, that's usually the two places that parents go to is I won't feel it at all or I shouldn't feel it or I'm going to beat you over the head with it. The middle ground, the other side of it is I feel it and it's mine. It's mine. It's my responsibility. I'm carrying it now. It's my hurt. It's my anger. It's my betrayal. It's my frustration. It's my distrust. And I get to feel it. And I'm entitled to it, and it's something I'm going to work with. And that's the middle ground, is ownership. This is not about right or wrong. When you express a resentment to your child expresses it to you, it's not about a critique. It's not about this is how you should do it better. I used to say to clients when I was working with the resent part of this assignment, if you're expressing a resentment authentically, if you're expressing it wisely, you're not saying whether the other person did the right or the wrong thing. You're merely saying, this is how I felt. This is what went on for me. This is my anger. This is my pain. This is my hurt. So we change the quality of it from right and wrong and morality to feelings, which can less easily be argued with or debated. They can be if we're crazy, but ideally they're not. With regard to them, we're learning to teach them to feel. Right? This is probably the first departure point for them saying, I'm going to, in a healthy way, express my feelings instead of act them out passively or aggressively or deceptively. Right? I think that I always say that if somebody can express a resentment, particularly a child in our program, in a healthy way, it is a better litmus test, better evidence of their accountability than an apology letter. Right? Because this is what it looks like. I'm angry at you. I was hurt by you. It's my reaction. I own it. I feel it. It's my choice about how to deal with it, but I am angry with you. Or I am sad, or I am hurt, or I was embarrassed, whatever it is. Right? That sounds like accountability. It's easy to memorize the language of apology. I'm so sorry, or I'll never do it again. That's easy for any child. They know that that's the quote-unquote right thing to do. And it is counterintuitive for most parents. Because most of us believe and we're kind of raised and bathed in guilt, right? We equated guilt with morality instead of this kind of awareness and enlightenment that I'm describing right now. We learn how to supplant symptoms. Our children learn how to unpack their pain and supplant their symptoms with expressions of feelings. The best way for you to help them let it go, I think so many parents are worried sending your child here, any kind of intervention, the mistakes that you made, you could just list any potential mistake or any mistake according to them. Parents say, how do I help them to let it go? And my response is, you just listen. If you get an investment and they can sense it, and them getting over it, they are much more likely to become fixated on that feeling. But when you say, yeah, I could have been wrong. I'm so sorry. I missed you. I made a mistake. I see it. Thanks for telling me. All those kinds of things. You in other words, you create a kind of viscosity that they can move through it instead of staying stuck. It's okay for them to be angry at you for something that you even disagree with. Mom and Dad, I'm resentful that you wouldn't let me smoke crack in the house. And that's a silly example. But just to highlight the principle, they get to be angry at anything. And we want to talk them out of it. And that one right there on the page, I mean, we know how insane that is. But we still, in more subtle examples, get into a debate where we try to be right. again, we ask the child, we ask you to take this out of a discussion or a dialogue around blame and a discussion around intimacy and truth and honesty and authenticity and feelings. The feelings that we have, the resentment we have, is not an excuse or license for acting out behavior, for cruelty. You know, I have a lot of students that would say to me, well, I'm just being honest. And I say, well, punching somebody in the nose isn't being honest. Right? That's punching somebody in the nose. Telling somebody you're angry with them, that's honest. But hitting somebody in the face, that's not honesty. That's an action of violence. So it doesn't become license for behaviors, for inappropriate and abusive behaviors. And like I said, it's not necessarily a critique. But I will tell you, most parents, when they hear a good resent statement, will take it as a critique. Because of their own limitations, their own insecurities, their own overwhelming sense of insecurity as a parent, unsureness of themselves, they're going to likely be triggered to think of it as a critique. Because again, that's the culture we came from. We came from a culture of blame and finger pointing. The third R is a respect. These are things I respect about you, what you've done, qualities you have, etc. Working on busting, working hard on being out here, being open with me, and so forth. So with regard to you, part of it is the most important part of the impact letter often the children respond to is when their parent expresses the respect. It's the part where the child often softens. That's the lesson that I've learned from watching impact letters over the years. I would say, I don't know what the number is, but a third to a half of the time, the child becomes most vulnerable during that part of the impact letter when a parent starts to talk about their affinity, their affection, and things they respect about their child. You become less threatening. So it takes a willingness to feel a little bit more on the person who's expressing it, a softness, an openness, but it oftentimes creates a kind of sensitivity that invites safety. And the fact of the matter is, the whole truth includes, nobody's all bad. Nobody's always susceptible to peer pressure. Nobody's always uncaring, right? This particular skill, the third skill, the respect skill, asks us to acknowledge the wholeness of the other person. And it's okay for us to model and embrace the idea that we can both respect somebody and or have affection for them. Those are not necessarily the same thing, right? And I think so much of what happens in our meaning in life is we equate praise with affection, praise with belonging. I'm not a huge fan of overpraising, like I talked about last night on the webinar anyway, because it can be a substitute for affection. It can be a substitute for a child learning and discovering their own meaning that they make out of their success. It can lead to children cheating or lying so as to maintain that place on the pedestal. Because that place on the pedestal is the only thing that's going to ensure that they're not going to be rejected or alone. So we move these two things apart. We talk about praise and we talk about affection and we talk about them in different places. We can have affection for somebody who really is making a lot of mistakes. And we can have a lot of respect for somebody that we don't necessarily know or have a lot of warmth for. I like the phrase, I'm happy for you. Like I said, I don't like the phrase, I'm proud of you. I try never to use that phrase with my children. There are times when I lapse into it because I can't figure out a better way to say it. But really usually what I mean is, I'm happy for you. I'm glad for you. I'm impressed. That took a lot of strength. I can see that. How do you feel about it for you? It seems like that's something you can be proud of. It seems like you're happy with that. Is that something you wanted for yourself, right? So I can talk about it without drenching them in this smothering kind of praise that really takes responsibility for their esteem. Take a step back, right? Take a step back, a more objective stance, and observe. And let your child develop a sense of self that becomes and grows independent of you. And then watch yourself from rescuing. I think a lot of parents, because they believe their children are fragile, they then treat their children as fragile. Because they believe, even though every parent on this webinar would say, who says my child blames me, I don't want them to blame me, would psychologically take on responsibility when their child loses motivation or momentum because the child blames them for not praising or not being impressed. We'd be triggered by that. So be very aware and work on that dynamic in the relationship. With them, listen. This is a good opportunity to practice great communication. Because it's a lot easier to hear somebody express a respect toward you than it is to hear something where they resent or feel hurt by you. So practice just listening. Don't dismiss it. Don't say it's nothing. Say thank you and acknowledge it. And this is important. What somebody says about you is not about you. It's about them. There may be value in it. There may be an opportunity for you to see something in yourself that they happen to reflect, but it's not necessarily about you. That idea is one of the greatest difficulties or challenges that most of us face in communication. The fourth R is request. This is something that I ask of you, something I request in the future. Healthy communication, I want you to complete an aftercare program, so forth and so on. I've talked about this in our communication model from years ago. I've talked about this idea that we debated amongst ourselves about whether we would include the request as a part of our communication model. And my point was, it's there anyway. The want is there anyway. So to make it overtly doesn't make it more manipulative. It makes it less manipulative. So when we express our request overtly, we're making it transparent, honest, clear, less manipulative, less covert. Part of what I see with parents sometimes is that they will either request and drop it, or request, right? It develops into manipulation. I'm trying to talk you into it. I want you to want it, to like it, to believe in it. And instead of, here's my request, here's what my expectations are, and then here are my consequences. Because we don't want to fight the battle of having to demonstrate boundaries, because those are scary for us, because we were punished when we were growing up because when we have boundaries. We're punished in society when we have boundaries. My daughter was just giving me an example, a harmless example, of some people that wanted her to go sledding late at night. And she had been working all day and it was very late at night. She's a young adult woman. And she said, I'm tired. I've been working all day. I want to go to bed. And they just said, please come. Just do it, even though you don't want to. And then when she said she'd come, they were excited. She said, she talked about this sense of betrayal, like that she was going to be punished if she set a healthy boundary. We get that in our lives, right? We are told that we are bad or selfish when we set a healthy boundary. We get too attached to the result instead of just, here's my request, here's my boundary, here's my consequence. We expect children to, like I said, have the mental, moral, emotional capacity to know right from wrong and to think in the future the way that an adult does, and that we don't, then we end up feeling resentful. We expect them to agree with us, or we try to reason them into it. We expect them to like or appreciate our choices, right? That's one of the greatest differences between being a non-parent of a client that I see and being a parent to my child or watching you with your children. Is that when you're the parent, you have this need, this investment for them to be okay or like it or agree with it, right? Because it validates us and we don't want to feel abandoned or bad or wrong or insecure. And when a child experiences the freedom that the parent doesn't need to be taken care of in that way, it is the most liberating, powerful gift that a parent can give to a child. As we listen to them, we learn to distinguish between real manipulation and hearing it because of our own context, because of our own background, because of our own baggage. Slow down. One of the ways to be more effective, like I said, is to close your mouth, but just to slow down. Make decisions slower when you have requests coming at you. And steer away from the right and wrong debate of it. Just hear it. So many times, I have seen our clients and students, as they enter our program and start in the initial phases, make requests of it. Make requests of us or of their parents. And what they learn after a few weeks is that when we say, I hear your request, they learn to adjust. They learn to back off of the manipulation. They learn to recognize I may or may not get what I want. And if we understand their feelings, it doesn't necessarily grant, endorse, or condone. The example that I give, because it was a real simple one that I had some time ago, is when my daughter wanted my big Rottweiler to play on the couch. And I said, Coda can't play on the couch. We're not going to allow that. And she said, well, that isn't fair. And I said, I know, right? It isn't fair. Wouldn't it be great if he could play on the couch? And then she said, so he can? So you hear it there? She heard in my empathizing that I was condoning it and giving permission, because that's where we are. That's where our intimacy is. It's about right and wrong and agreement instead of about a healthy boundary and feeling what we feel. Let's take it home. When you come to this kind of discussion, prepare yourself, but be open-minded. Be ready to learn. Be wary when you come to this assignment, specifically if it's a field assignment, to steer away from sharing future information. Right? Hear requests, hear questions, reflect them, respond slowly, but don't give away future information to make them feel or ease their anxiety. Come to this assignment in the field ready to work. You might be asked to do it on paper. You might be asked to do it at a visit. You might be asked to do it at the conclusion of the program. Come ready to work. Like I always say, parents that come ready to celebrate usually walk away disappointed and upset, or avoiding difficult or honest topics. People that come ready to work usually walk away feeling enriched by the process and having learned something. Remember that you're a part of the process, right? It's not a dog and pony show out there. When you come for an assignment like this, when you come to participate with this assignment, it's going to evolve. It's going to be work. And you're going to be a part of the process. And it's going to be what it's going to be. Open your mind, clear your mind. It's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to express that anxiety, to own it, to talk about it, to be present with it. I talk about my own field visit. And learning that I screwed it up. I made a lot of mistakes. And I was an expert field facilitator of visits. But what I learned was it was okay for me to mess it up. And one of the things that I learned, and my son learned through the process, that I always took control. I always got it right. And it might have been more valuable for me to mess up and make mistakes than it would have been had I got it perfectly all the way. And that it's okay for them to lead. Let your child lead. You don't have to lead them. They can take care of you physically. They're going to have, in some ways, more developed skill set in these areas than you do. And that's okay. That's a really powerful shift for them to see and experience. We want you to learn the I Feel statement. We want you to learn the reflections. If you haven't looked at the I Feel statement webinar, the Healthy Communication webinar, please look at that before a field visit. And all of these things create the opportunity for connection. That's really what it is. We could just say to you, be intimacy. We could talk about, theorize, philosophize, quote, give you wonderful quotes about intimacy. But these are the skills, the tools that provide the vehicle that take you to a place of healthy connection and intimacy. And it's going to feel foreign. It's going to feel strange, like when your tennis instructor changes your grip on your racket. It's going to feel awkward at first and contrived. But in the long run, after practice, it's going to lead to a much more effective, in the case of tennis, a tennis stroke, in the case of a relationship, communication and relationship with each other. All right. Happy to go over any questions on topic. Stephanie? I know there's going to be some kind of delay because of the delay we're having. We were having it last night with Steve too. So once you post the question and I read it, you can flip to the next question because it'll be 15 or 20 seconds before the next one comes up. Okay, none so far. So here are the upcoming workshops. Heroic Parenting, we have one full date. We might be, I told you last night, there's a possibility of a second January date. Let us know if you want to go. The workshops are on the left. The parenting intensives and family intensives on the right are for very deep personal work. 4 to possibly 8 participants. On the left is experiential education, activities, lectures, role plays, and so forth. So you can go to our website to look at our pursuit trips for young adults, sober fun, high adventure trips for young adults and for families. Please go to any combination of 6 of these meetings while your children are with us. Please don't wait any longer. If your child's in the program, start going now. Follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy, Facebook at EvokeTherapyPrograms.com, and then go to our blog for our upcoming blog articles. I just got my new paperback copies today, so they should go on Amazon in the next day or so, and I just got my first case. And then you can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page if you want to look up books on any topic. Go to Barnes & Noble if you want to find one of the last remaining copies of the hard copy of my book. All right, any last questions before I close it? What happens on the field visit? It's different for everybody. It can be an overnight visit. It can be a day visit. There's going to be work. There's going to be some time with your therapist, with your child's therapist, discussing. There's going to be some group time. There's going to be some alone time. So there's going to be maybe some meal time, some group time. So there could be even some fun time. The thing that you can count on is a visit with the therapist and your child, some group introduction time, and some alone time in almost all cases. And then the rest of it is going to happen as it goes, and it's going to evolve. How long is a field visit? Like I said, it can be anywhere from 2 days to a few hours. I've had field visits as short as an hour. I've had field visits that were very intentional, that were 15 minutes long. But an average field visit is a 6 to 7 hour, 8 hour day. Some are overnight, depending upon where the group is and the location and how logistics are working with your therapist and with your child. I miss my son so much. You will get back a new version. There's this idea, it's a philosophical idea of there is a grief here, there is a loss. And with every loss is something new can be born. And so the thing on the other side of this pain will be a much richer, much more developed relationship with your son that he has with himself, that you have with him, that you have with yourself, and so on. So the grief is real. You can't escape it. It can't be dismissed. You can't get around it. And I can tell you, having gone through this journey as a participant and as a facilitator for years, the other side of it is amazing and beautiful. Is it good to do a field visit with a parent weekend? If you can, a lot of people can do that. If it works out timing-wise, my answer would be yes. That's the only qualification I would give to that question is if it works out to be a good clinical fit for your child where they're at in the program, it's an ideal time to make a visit, absolutely. And we don't want to force it because it might not be the right time. And then we can't have a parent weekend every weekend, so fingers crossed if it's within range of what's clinically appropriate where your child is at in their progress and their growth, then it is an ideal time for sure. Would you ever advise doing this exercise more than once? My son and I did this in a 90-day program before he went to Willis. I don't think it was really processed fully at that time. He is now at an RTC and still fully armed defensive. I wonder if this might help. I think it's a great exercise to do many, many times. Again, it's just a basic structure that gives us some basic parameters about, I'm using the word basic a lot, about basic elements in relationship that we have with each other, basic feelings and reactions that we have to each other. So I think if not formally, and I think formally it's justified, I think it can be something that we do over and over and over again. If he's armed and defensive, the question then becomes, is he ready for it? You know, I would be more interested. I think for his armedness and defensiveness, if you try to pry that armedness and defensiveness open, he's going to feel that you don't respect his boundaries and he's hurt, and he's going to continue, dig in, build up that wall, keep that armor that much more fortified. So I would be really careful to disrespect his defenses. I would honor them. I would understand that he has good reason for them instead of trying to pry or manipulate my way through them. Is it being recommended that my daughter goes to a residential program? What is your experience? Oh, it is being recommended that my daughter goes to a residential program. What is your experience with results of that? My experience is that it gives people more time. It gives parents more time and children more time. It is by far the more recommended course after a program like ours, and that has developed out of experience, not out of theory, and this is what I mean by that. Theoretically, when we started our program 20 years ago, our thinking was that it would be nice if half or more of our clients and students could go home. What we learned by experience was that people found more success with a longer length of stay in treatment. There's almost no variable that is a better predictor. There's almost no variable that's a better predictor of long-term maintenance of gains than time in treatment. But if I can give you one to help with the most, it is a parent who does their work. That is not to say that it is your fault or you're the cause. I will tell you, it changes the dance. It changes the dynamic. It changes your perspective. It changes your response. It changes your stress. It changes the feelings that you have, your skill capacity. If you want to know what's one thing I can do to improve, to reduce the length of stay or the need for the length of stay, and I'm not being specific about it because it's different for everybody, it is get involved and obsessed in you doing your work for you. Do your work for you. How do you determine when a child is ready for a field visit? It's a dialogue for There's not even, all field visits aren't even for the same reason. There is a webinar on field visits, so you can look at that. Some field visits are to celebrate, to congratulate. Some are for a specific piece of work. Some are to challenge a client. Some are to unstick a client. Some are this blank slate that we have no idea. We just feel like that's the next step in treatment. So even sharing with you the handful of reasons why a visit might be decided suggests or illustrates to you the idea that it's not one right reason. It is a dialogue. It's a discussion. It's a co-created decision between you and your therapist at a vote in the context of the child and the work that they're doing. Is my son cold in the Utah wilderness with just a tarp? Why not a full tent? They do have tents if it becomes extreme weather. But the fact of the matter is their gear that they wear, their sleeping bag, they're fully equipped to deal with any kind of temperature that we have out here. The reason that we live in a primitive, the reason we have a primitive living wilderness program is because it cements and illustrates the lessons, the principles that you want to teach. You know, the law of the harvest, what you reap is what you sow. Working for something, taking something for granted, appreciating something, seeing the natural and logical consequences of things. What it takes to, you have to follow your staff, you have to listen to your leaders, you have to work as a team. All of the things that you would want them to learn as a family are best illustrated often by the primitive living model. So we don't expose them to the elements to break them down or give them a sense of, you should feel grateful. We expose them to primitive living so they can learn the lessons that are inherent in that kind of living. Because it is often in our American culture where the important lessons are contrived. Whereas in primitive living, they're inherent in the challenges of primitive living. What is the parent work? How do we know what to do? It's all the things I talked about tonight. I'll click on them. Here's the parent work. It's here. It's going to the workshop. We'd like everybody to go to the workshop. If you can, make it to one of the more personal intensives. That's also what it is. It is not necessarily pursuits, although that's an added piece. It's going to these 6 meetings. And I can't lay out for you all the work that you'll do in connection with going to these 6 meetings, but go to any combination of these 6 meetings. Go to these websites, find meetings in your area. It's doing the work that I talk about in the book. It's doing the work on the parent portal, right? You have a parent portal, and new assignments pop up each week, and those are the assignments. It is also embedded in the discussion that you have with your Evoke therapist each week when you review both the work that the child is doing and the letters that are coming to and from your child each week. That is where the work is. So it's all of those things. It's just believing you have work to do. It's acknowledging, of course, I'm imperfect. Of course I have wounds. Of course I have issues. Of course they're going to affect my child. Of course that's a part of this dynamic. Of course I came from an imperfect but loving family. And I may have had an imperfect but loving family that I created. And we're going to work on that. And there's not going to be shame with that. And there's not going to be blame. I'm just going to be on the journey. I'm going to be humble enough. I'm going to be strong enough to look at that work. All right. Are we done, Stephanie? We're having that lag again. As a parent who did an intensive in October and has done a transition camp in January, I can truly say the gear, especially the sleeping bags, etc., really do protect from the elements. I was concerned as the other parent about the elements. Thank you. Believe me, I go out there in the coldest months of the year, and if the gear wasn't adequate, I would not go out there. I grew up in Southern California, and my idea of cold was 50 degrees growing up. So we don't want them to unduly suffer. We want them to be intentional. We want them to learn the lessons. We want them to see the lessons that are inherent in primitive living, but we don't want them to suffer just for the sake of suffering. But it is a challenge. Nature presents a challenge. And it asks us to be mindful. Yikes. The sister that is home is angry and having a hard time with her sibling gone. She is shut down and refuses therapy. It's time for me to do another sibling webinar. I think we have some sibling webinars in our archive, so look at those. You might share those. You can watch them without her, because I give some models and ideas about how to respond to children who are home angry and upset. Right? That's my first response to her would be to say, that's not unusual. It might be normal. She's trying to take back her power. In some ways, the crises, the acting out, the abuse, the chaos that her sister was creating when she was home took away her sense of safety and control and power. And so now she's taking it back. So in a way that makes sense. That's the first therapeutic connection I would make to the child at home. And I wouldn't try to force it. I would validate it and sit with it and honor it to begin with. Give it its space. Give it its honor. When I say honor defenses, what I mean is defenses protect us from perceived threats. And if we just try to break through the barriers of defenses, we don't respect the wound, the pain, the fear, the anxiety that the armor, that the defense represents. And we're likely, if we do just bash through the defense, we are likely to provoke a higher wall, a thicker wall, a greater defense. So honor it to begin with. And you can go over some of the webinars on siblings. We try to do one a month. Stephanie, I think it's time to put one on the calendar for January. And then we keep a couple in the archive so you can look at the last couple. All right, folks, thank you for all the questions. Great questions tonight, great participation. On the 4th, next Monday, I'm going to be talking about relapse and regression. So join us then, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I hope these points are helpful. I hope they give you some connection to your child and the kind of work, the kind of thinking that they're involved with right now. And I hope you have a great New Year's Eve. And remember, you're making an investment in the New Year's Eves in 2017, 18, 19, 20, and so on. And this is a real sacrifice. So thanks for joining us. Have a great New Year's and safe New Year's Eve, and I'll talk to you on Monday. Take care. Bye-bye.